In the dry season of 1969, the Australian Army inserted a four-man SAS patrol into a valley in Phuoc Tuy Province that intelligence had described as lightly held. Intelligence was wrong. What those four men encountered in the next 72 hours was so far outside the parameters of their mission that the officer who debriefed them initially refused to file the report. Not because he didn't believe them, because he did. And because the numbers, the kill counts, the assault waves, the ammunition expenditure against the size of the force they faced, contradicted every established doctrine about what four men could survive. The operation was classified within 48 hours of extraction. It stayed classified for 31 years. When the files were finally released in 2000, military historians read them and went quiet. Not because the tactics were complicated, because they weren't. Four men had done something that entire companies, entire battalions had failed to do. They had faced a force 300 times their size. They had held, and all four had come home. This is the story of Patrol Kilo 9. This is the story of the 72 hours that the Australian Army spent 3 decades trying to explain. And this is the story of four men who decided, in a single moment on a jungle ridgeline, that the mathematics of survival did not apply to them. The helicopter didn't land. It never landed. Insertion by rappel was standard for SAS operations in Vietnam. A fast rope descent into the canopy, 30 seconds of exposure. Then the aircraft was gone before any enemy observer could fix its position. The patrol had practiced the sequence hundreds of times. They could execute it half asleep, in total darkness in driving rain. Tonight it was all three. Sergeant David Carver went first. 32 years old, a West Australian from Kalgoorlie who had joined the Army at 17 and never once considered leaving. He had served in Borneo during confrontation, completed 2 previous tours in Vietnam, and carried the particular stillness of a man who had been in enough danger to stop being frightened of it. Behind him came Corporal Ray Finch, 28 from Adelaide, the team's signaller. Finch had a gift for radio systems that bordered on the supernatural. He could nurse a damaged set back to life with electrical tape and instinct, and had done exactly that on his previous tour when it mattered most. Then Trooper Eddie Warwick, 25 from Darwin, the team's medic. The youngest and quietest of the four, with a habit of noticing things seconds before anyone else, and a calm that seemed almost inappropriate given what his job sometimes required. Last down the rope was Trooper Sam Nguyen, 26, born in Saigon to a Vietnamese father and an Australian mother, raised in Brisbane from the age of 8. He spoke Vietnamese with a fluency that could pass for native in the dark, and understood NVA doctrine, their signals, their patrol patterns, their psychology, not from a training manual but from childhood. His father had served in the Army of the Republic of Vietnam. Sam had joined the Australian Army partly in his honor. 4 men, each carrying close to 40 kilograms in 38-degree heat. A mission duration of 72 hours, an objective that was, on paper, straightforward. Insert into grid reference Tango 7. Move to the high ground overlooking the Song Rai River crossing. Establish an observation post. Count and photograph enemy movement. Extract at 600 hours on August 22nd. No contact, no engagement. In, observe, out. The helicopter was gone in under a minute. The jungle absorbed them. They moved for 4 hours through darkness so complete that each man tracked the one ahead by sound alone. Carver navigated by compass and memory, having memorized the map before insertion because reading one with a torch in hostile territory was a way to die. By 6:30 hours they were on the ridgeline above the river crossing. The ford below was 40 meters wide, the water brown and slow. On the far bank, a track disappeared north into the tree line. Nothing moved. For the first 6 hours, nothing moved at all. At 13:40 hours, the crossing came alive. It started with a single scout on the far bank, then a hand signal, then movement. A lot of movement. Nguyen was on the scope. He didn't say anything for 30 seconds. Then he turned to Carver and held up 5 fingers, then another 5, then another. Not a patrol, not a company. A column. Soldiers crossing in tactical formation, weapons above the water, moving with the efficiency of men who had done this before. The lead elements were already disappearing into the jungle on the near bank, while the tail was still emerging from the tree line opposite. 11 minutes for the column to complete the crossing. Carver counted 340 men. Finch was already assembling the antenna. 0, this is Kilo 9. Contact report. Enemy column, estimated strength 340, crossed Tango 7 Ford at 13:40 hours moving nor-northeast. Request guidance. Kilo 9, maintain observation. Do not engage. They maintained observation. Over the next 4 hours, 2 more columns crossed the ford. By 1800 hours, Carver had counted 1,240 enemy soldiers moving through their area. He transmitted the figure to base. Base went silent for 4 minutes. Then, Kilo 9, confirm your count. You are reporting over 1,000 enemy personnel. Affirmative. 3 separate columns. Regimental movement. Recommend immediate air strike on the crossing and priority extraction. Kilo 9, negative on extraction. All assets committed to Operation Overlord in Grid Romeo. Earliest extraction window is 72 hours. Maintain observation. Acknowledge. Carver looked at the handset for a long moment. Acknowledged. Kilo 9 out. He set it down and looked at his 3 men. Their faces were still patient, waiting. They had heard. 72 hours, he said quietly. We stay small, we stay silent. 1,200 of them down there and they don't know we exist. Our job is to keep it that way. Nobody argued. They were SAS. They already knew what happened if it didn't stay that way, and saying it out loud wouldn't change it. They settled in for the night. It was Nguyen who heard it first. He was on watch when something in the jungle's ambient sound shifted. Not a new noise, an absence. The insects had changed rhythm, not stopped, just changed, the way they did when something large was moving nearby. He put his hand on Warwick's arm. 4 men, still in the darkness, listening. Then it came, not footsteps, something subtler. Vegetation being moved aside with deliberate care. Trained soldiers searching for something, moving uphill, toward them. Carver gave 3 hand signals. Pack everything. Prepare to move. Wait. In absolute silence, 4 men dismantled a complete observation post in 90 seconds and melted back into the undergrowth. They went aground in a depression between 2 large root systems and pressed flat. The patrol passed below them 4 minutes later. 6 NVA regulars, moving in tactical formation, sweeping the high ground before the next column moved. They passed 15 meters below the Australian position, without stopping, and disappeared east along the ridgeline. The Australians didn't move for 20 minutes after the sound faded. Then Finch inched out the radio. 0, Kilo 9. Enemy security patrol swept our position at 4:12. 6 personnel did not locate us. Patrol activity indicates enemy is aware of possible observation on the high ground. Position compromised in principle. Restate request for extraction. Negative. No assets. Hold position. Carver processed this. Then he made the decision that would define the next 68 hours. They couldn't stay. A sweep meant another sweep was coming in daylight, with more men with dogs. But they couldn't extract without helicopters. And they couldn't move far without walking into 1,200 enemy soldiers already saturating the valley, which meant they needed a new position, defensible. One the enemy wouldn't associate with a 4-man observation patrol. He studied the map in the darkness. 200 meters north, a secondary ridgeline rose sharply to a rocky outcrop. natural cover in every direction, steep slope below, and ascending force channeled into predictable approaches, reverse slope for concealment and escape. As close to a natural fortress as this jungle offered, he pointed. 3 heads leaned in. 3 pairs of eyes understood without words. They moved at 500 hours and spent the remaining pre-dawn darkness turning a rocky outcrop into the most defensible 4-man position in Phuoc Tuy Province. They built no structures, cut nothing. Cutting vegetation left white wounds visible from distance, and the smell of cut sap carried further than most soldiers realized. Instead, they bent, wove, arranged. Natural materials repositioned to create firing lanes while maintaining concealment. Rocks moved to look like they'd always been there. Carver assigned each man a primary firing position and a secondary, each with its own escape route to a rally point 15 meters back. Phuoc rigged trip lines using wire from the radio kit, connected to clusters of shell casings. Anyone moving the approaches in darkness would announce themselves. Nguyen cached ammunition at each position, distributed so any one of them could hold independently if the team was separated. Finch prepared 2 radio positions, tested both, changed the battery, memorized every frequency and code. By 8:30 hours they were ready. Whatever was coming, they would meet it here. The sound reached them before the movement did, not the careful discipline of the earlier patrol. Voices kept low but present, confident movement, a sweep with numbers behind it. Nguyen held up both hands. 10 men, maybe more. 12 in total, spreading into a search line along the ridgeline, spaced 5 meters apart, moving slowly, checking both sides of the crest. Professional, thorough, and heading directly into the Australian position in 90 seconds. Each man was already in his primary firing position, weapons up, safety off. This was the thing that separated SAS operators from other soldiers. Not the running and shooting. Any trained man could do that on adrenaline. This was the waiting. Letting a threat close without a movement, without a sound, until the distance had shrunk to the point where every round would count and none would be wasted. 40 meters, 30, 20. The lead man stopped. Something didn't look right, a rock displaced, the faintest impression in the leaf litter. He raised his hand to halt the line. Carver fired. What happened in the next 8 seconds was not chaos. Carver took the lead man and the one to his left. Finch took the far right. Phuoc engaged the center. Nguyen covered the rear for anyone who broke away to flank. 8 men down in 4 seconds. The remaining 4 broke 2 back along the ridgeline, 2 down the slope. Nguyen tracked the ones going downhill, fired twice. 1 fell. 1 kept going. Carver let him go. 1 survivor reporting back was useful. He would describe fire volume suggesting a section or platoon. His commander would have to decide whether to commit forces to the ridge or continue the primary mission. That decision took time. Time was what Kilo 9 needed most. Redistribute, Carver said. They moved to secondary positions in 45 seconds, leaving nothing, no brass, no blood, no direction of movement. Anyone coming to investigate would find an ambush site, not the ambushers. 0 Kilo 9, contact. 12-man sweep patrol, 11 down, 1 escaped. Expect retaliation, request extraction status. No change. 60 hours remaining, copy. Kilo 9 out. Carver sat against a boulder and drank 2 mouthfuls of water. Phuoc was cleaning a rock fragment cut above his eye, one hand, eyes still on his sector. Nguyen was motionless, listening to the valley. Finch was breaking down the antenna with the speed of a man who'd made it automatic. 60 hours. He'd held positions against worse odds with less preparation. Not for 60 hours. He closed his eyes for 3 seconds, then opened them and looked at the approach routes, recalculating everything. They came with mortars first. 6 rounds walking up the slope, each closer than the last. The 6th landed where the primary firing position had been 4 hours ago, empty jungle. Carver had anticipated indirect fire. He let the barrage exhaust itself. Then the assault came, 25 men in 3 elements, a center push with flanking groups on both sides trying to envelope the position simultaneously. Textbook, dangerous. Against 4 men, 1 successful flanking element would end everything. He let the center get to 20 meters. Grenades. 4 grenades downhill in sequence, 2-second intervals. The overlapping explosions made the volume of ordnance seem far larger than 4 men could throw. In the chaos, while the center was broken and survivors were going to ground, Carver and Warwick opened fire on the right flanking group caught exposed on the slope. Nguyen and Finch turned left. The left flanking element had found a depression that shielded them from the primary position, but not from Nguyen's secondary, which he had chosen 6 hours earlier specifically because he had looked at the slope and calculated where a flanking force would go. He opened fire at 15 meters. The element ceased to exist as a fighting force in under 10 seconds. The center pulled back down the slope. 4 minutes of contact, 22 enemy casualties, 0 Australian casualties. But the ammunition cost was real. Grenades gone, rounds expended. The math was simple. Every assault drained resources they couldn't replace while the enemy drew from a regiment. They needed to make the enemy afraid to assault. This is where the psychology began. Carver had studied the NVA the way a chess player studies a specific opponent. Not just the rules, but the particular patterns, the cultural pressure points, the psychological levers. He knew what the command feared: loss of face, failure to eliminate a small force, the whisper spreading through the ranks that something on that ridge couldn't be killed. He knew what the soldiers feared: the unknown, the enemy that moved without sound and struck without warning. He intended to become that thing. At 1600 hours, he sent Nguyen down the slope. Not to fight, to listen. Nguyen moved 200 meters through the jungle to a position above a natural gathering point, where enemy soldiers were massing between the failed assault and the next preparation. He lay there 40 minutes and listened to commanders giving orders, to soldiers talking among themselves, to the particular sound of a unit that had just absorbed a shock it hadn't expected. What he heard: the surviving sweep patrol member had reported contact with an estimated platoon. Commanders believed an Australian platoon had been inserted to interdict the regimental movement. Frustrated, angry, not yet afraid. Underneath the operational talk, something else. Soldiers away from officers, asking questions without comfortable answers. 11 men dead from a patrol nobody had seen. An assault hit from multiple directions by fire that seemed to come from everywhere simultaneously. Nobody with a clear picture of the position or its size. The jungle was filling the gap in knowledge with fear. Nguyen returned and reported. Carver listened. Then he made a decision the after-action report would describe as unconventional but effective. He ordered Finch to transmit on a frequency the NVA monitored, in Vietnamese. Nguyen composed the message and Finch sent it at 17:15 hours. Translated, it said, "Command, this is position Alpha. The second element has completed encirclement. We are ready to close on the valley floor on your order. Enemy regiment is contained. Entirely false. No second element. No encirclement. 4 men on a rocky outcrop." But somewhere in the valley, a signals operator tore that transmission off the air and ran it to his commander. A man who had already lost 20 men to what he'd been told was a platoon and was now receiving intelligence, suggesting that platoon was part of a larger force that had already encircled his regiment. The next assault didn't come. Not that evening. Not that night. 1,200 soldiers sat in the valley below a 4-man patrol and waited for an attack that was never coming. Night in the jungle was a different kind of warfare. No air support, no medevac, no reaction force. Just darkness and sound, and the alertness of men who understood that the next hour might be their last, and were choosing to treat it as just another hour to get through. They rotated watches in 90-minute shifts. The man not on watch didn't sleep so much as enter a light suspension, body resting, mind still processing every sound. They drank carefully. Ate nothing, food could wait. During the quiet, Phuoc tended to his teammates. He checked Carver's hands, both cut on rocks during the earlier displacement, neither deep, but carrying the particular risk of jungle infection that Vietnam had taught every medic to take seriously. He cleaned and dressed them without mentioning that his own shoulder had taken a fragment graze during the afternoon assault, and he hadn't told anyone. Carver noticed. "Show me, it's fine, show me." Phuoc showed him, 6 centimeters not deep, already clotting. Carver looked at it for 3 seconds. "If it stops being fine, you tell me." Understood. The longest conversation either of them had in 5 hours. At 300 hours, one of the trip lines sang, not a large element moving carelessly. A single careful disturbance. One person testing the ground before each step. A scout locating the exact position before the main body moved. Carver tracked the sound within 30 seconds, 20 meters below and left, moving diagonally across the slope. He let the scout sweep, watching the darkness for any shape. The scout found the trip line at 317, a faint musical note as wire displaced shell casings. Then silence. He'd stopped. He knew the slope was defended. He was deciding what to do. Carver made the decision for him. He threw a rock, not toward the scout, 30 meters to the right into dense undergrowth. The sound carried clearly. The scout turned toward it, which meant his back was to Carver. Carver covered 15 meters in 45 seconds. When he reached the scout, he ended the threat without a shot, without sound. He took the man's radio. Nguyen spent the next 20 minutes on that radio, building a picture of what was planned for morning. The regiment's commander had spent the evening in uncertain paralysis from the false encirclement transmission. But by midnight, his signals officers had assessed it as deception, likely a 4 or 5-man patrol without supporting elements. He had recalibrated. He was angry. And his response to anger was overwhelming force. 2 full companies at first light, 240 men, mortars, 2 medium machine guns, against 4. Carver sat with this for a moment. Then he did the mathematics, not the mathematics of survival, which he had set aside as a frame that wasn't useful, but the mathematics of what 4 men could accomplish in the next 6 hours before ammunition depletion made the equation unanswerable. "We need to not be here when they arrive." He pointed north on the map, a 3rd position further along the ridgeline, steeper approach, narrower frontage. "We move at 4:30. We leave this position exactly as we found it. When the assault wave comes up the slope at dawn and finds nothing, they'll spend time searching. That time is ours." 3 heads nodded. They moved. The 3rd position had one advantage Carver had identified from the map, and one problem he hadn't. The advantage: the approach from the valley was a narrow gully, 30 meters wide at the base, tapering to 15 at the crest. An attacking force moving up it would be channeled, predictable, unable to spread into flanking formation without leaving cover and exposing themselves on open slope. A choke point. Exactly what 4 men needed against 200. The problem: the reverse slope was steeper than the contours suggested, a near-vertical 12-meter drop into a dry stream bed. The escape route wasn't a route, it was a cliff. He adjusted. If they couldn't retreat, they had to hold. And to hold against 200 with 4 rifles and declining ammunition, they needed to make the cost of attack so high that the enemy lost the will before Kilo 9 lost the means. He briefed his team. "They come up the gully, we let them come. Not until I fire not a shot before mine. Then everything controlled, aimed. First priority is the lead element. Stop the lead, the column stops. Column stops, they're bunched in the gully. Bunched in the gully, they are exactly where we want them. Grenades? Warwick asked. After we stop the lead. Roll them in from above. Let the terrain do the work. Ammunition, Finch said. Shoot what needs shooting, we have enough. Not entirely true. They had enough for one sustained engagement. Maybe two, but saying otherwise served no purpose. The assault came at 6:13 hours. Two elements, one up the gully, one attempting a flanking movement east along the ridgeline. The flanking element was still picking through dense undergrowth when the gully element started its ascent. Carver waited. 60 meters, 50, 40, he fired. The lead man dropped. The column stopped. In the 3-second pause of men processing a lost point man, the Australians fired everything into the confined gully space. The walls contained and amplified the sound. 4 rifles becoming something that sounded like a much larger force engaging from multiple levels. Grenades rolled downhill into a mass of soldiers with nowhere to go. The column broke, pulled back to the base to reorganize. Officers rallied them. Within 15 minutes they were coming again, this time with the 2 machine guns positioned at the gully mouth, suppressing while the assault element moved. The machine guns changed everything. 7.62 millimeter at 600 rounds per minute. The Australians were pinned, pressed against rock, unable to return fire without stepping into a burst. He needed to kill the guns, which meant someone had to expose themselves. Warwick looked at him. Left gun, 80 meters. 1 shot from the secondary position before they see you. 1 shot. The secondary position offered a narrow oblique angle on the left gunner, enough if the shot was perfect. Not from prone, he would have to kneel, 2 seconds above cover. Right, said Warwick. He moved, he knelt, he fired. The left gun stopped. Warwick dropped behind cover. A burst from the right gun tore through the space he'd occupied half a second after he left it. He pressed flat, breathing steady, and gave Carver a thumbs up. Carver took the right gun from a gap in the rock formation invisible from below. He watched for the muzzle flash, waited for the firing pause, then 2 shots a second apart. The right gun stopped. The assault element, without suppression and already committed to the gully, chose to advance. Their officers made the wrong decision. For 22 minutes, Kilo 9 held the gully. When it ended, 64 enemy soldiers had become casualties in the confined ground below. The surviving element withdrew. The ridge went quiet in the particular stunned way that follows a defeat a larger force hadn't expected. Carver looked at his team. Finch had a field dressing on his forearm, fragment from a grenade on the gully lip. Nguyen was reloading magazines. Warwick was running a patch through his rifle barrel. Nobody spoke. They were past the point where speech was necessary. The assault stopped at 1100 hours, not because the regiment had run out of men. Because something had shifted in the command structure below. Something Nguyen tracked through the captured radio in real time. The regiment's commander had been receiving reports for 36 hours from assault elements that couldn't find a clear picture of what they were fighting. From officers who had lost men to a force that seemed to occupy multiple positions simultaneously and then disappear. From soldiers who were attaching meaning to what was happening that went beyond tactical reversal. The ridge had become something in the imagination of 1,200 men, not just a defended position, something else. This was not an accident. Carver had understood before the first shot was fired that the most powerful weapon available to 4 men against 1,200 was not their rifles. It was the gap between what the enemy knew and what the enemy imagined. He had worked to widen that gap at every turn. The false encirclement transmission, the ammunition discipline that prevented observers from calculating shooter numbers, the positions that gave fire from unexpected angles, the disappearances from positions that assault elements swept and found empty. The sensation of fighting something that couldn't be located, fixed, or killed. What Nguyen heard on the captured radio was an army in an argument with itself, officers demanding another assault. Senior NCOs expressing the skepticism that in any army represents the gap between what commanders believe and what soldiers know. And underneath everything, in traffic between the smallest units, the texture of men who had decided the ridge was not worth dying on. At 13:30 hours, a different signal came through. From base. Kilo 9, we have air assets available. Need your contact report and enemy position data for strike planning. For the next 40 minutes. Carver and Nguyen worked from memory, and 2 days of accumulated observation to build an intelligence picture. Where the command element was, where the main body had consolidated, where the supply caches sat, the movement patterns they'd recorded. They transmitted it in carefully coded messages. At 15:10 hours, they heard the aircraft, too high for ground attack. B-52s at altitude, identifiable not by sound, but by the barely there vibration in the air above the cloud layer. The kind of aircraft that obliterated not a position but a grid square. The valley below the ridge shuddered. The jungle convulsed. A sound not like explosions but like the earth being rearranged, felt in the chest, the teeth, the bones. The ridge where Kilo 9 sat was outside the strike zone. Barely. When the sound stopped, the valley was quiet. Not the quiet of tension, the quiet of absence. Nguyen put the captured radio to his ear. Traffic frantic and broken. Moving away. A regiment that had been a coherent force an hour ago becoming scattered subunits trying to find each other, and escape a valley that had just been restructured by several tons of ordnance. Kilo 9 sat on its ridge and waited. The last night was the strangest. Dispersed enemy elements were still moving through the jungle below, small groups, unpredictable, dangerous in the particular way of soldiers, without command structure or clear purpose. Carver maintained full alert discipline. The trip line stayed. Watches rotated. Nobody relaxed, but the valley had changed. The background noise of 1,200 men operating in close proximity. The coughs and voices and equipment sounds no noise discipline could entirely suppress from a regiment, was diminished. Spread thin, moving away, they were still out there, they were no longer coming. At 200 hours, while Warwick watched and the others rested, Carver lay on his back and looked at the canopy above and made an accounting. Not of casualties, he'd do that in the debrief. Something less quantifiable. He was thinking about the moment, 36 hours earlier, when the mathematics had been clear and unambiguous. 4 men, 1,200 enemy. 72 hours until extraction, and he had set those mathematics aside. Not because they were wrong, because accepting them was the one thing that would make them true. He was thinking about the fact that he'd been right, not because his team was invincible. Because the thing that kills men in impossible situations is not the enemy. It is the moment of deciding the situation is impossible. Carver hadn't decided that. His team hadn't. And so the situation had remained not impossible, but very, very difficult, which was a category of problem that training and discipline and commitment to one another could address. He was thinking about Warwick's shoulder, which needed proper treatment in the next 12 hours before the jungle did what it did to open wounds. He was thinking about Finch, who hadn't slept more than 90 minutes in any consecutive stretch for 2 days, and who was performing radio duties with undiminished precision, because the alternative was not acceptable to Finch. He was thinking about Nguyen, who had spent 48 hours absorbing and translating from a language that carried the full weight of a personal history, a father's service, a country divided. A war that was not abstract to him in the way it might be to the others, and who had performed every task required with a quality of focus that Carver recognized as the focus of a man for whom the stakes were not merely professional. 4 men, he closed his eyes. At 4:30 hours, Finch touched his arm. Extraction birds inbound, 600 hours. LZ is open ground 200 meters south. Carver opened his eyes. Looked at the darkness, the rocks, the rifle, the jungle pressing in. Picked up his weapon and checked it from habit, not because it needed checking, but because the checking was part of who he was. "Wake them up," he said. Moving to an extraction LZ was always the most dangerous moment. The patrol was exhausted. The enemy knew they were there. And the LZ was the one point in the operation where their position was fixed and predictable. They had to be at that exact location at that exact time. Nguyen's monitoring of the radio traffic had confirmed enemy elements between the current position and the LZ. 200 meters of occupied jungle in pre-dawn darkness, with helicopters 11 minutes out. Carver moved them in single file, himself at point. They moved at the pace of the slowest safe step, not the crawl of an insertion, but the deliberate movement of men extracting through hostile ground, with the clock running. At 80 meters from the LZ, they made contact. 5 men scattered across the track, a dispersed element that had settled in this section of jungle during the withdrawal. Whether by design or accident didn't matter. Carver made the call in under a second, controlled fire from the jungle edge. 3 down before the remaining 2 broke east. No pursuit, straight through. 70 meters, 50. The jungle thinned. Open ground appeared 40 meters across, grass knee-high, the eastern sky showing the first gray of dawn. They broke from the tree line at a run. Carver popped smoke at 5:58. Orange. The confirmation came back immediately. Kilo 9, visual on orange, inbound 2 minutes. He could hear it. The sound a soldier in the field never heard without a physiological response that 2 days of combat couldn't suppress. Rotors, low and fast. A gunship ahead of the Huey door gunner sweeping the tree line, the slick flaring and touching the grass for 4 seconds. 4 men threw themselves through the doors. Carver was last in. He didn't look back at the ridge. There was nothing to see in the half-light, just jungle, just a dark tree line against a brightening sky. Nothing visible from above that would tell you what had happened there in the last 72 hours. The helicopter lifted off. Below them the valley pulled away, the canopy spreading flat in every direction, the river crossing a brief glint of water in the early light, everything already becoming abstract, becoming map, becoming grid reference and report. The debrief took 6 hours. Carver delivered the intelligence summary first, the regimental movement, the routes, the crossing points, the consolidation area. This was what the mission had been for, and he gave it with the precision of a man who had spent 2 days watching a large enemy force and had not wasted the observation. Then the contact report. The officer conducting the debrief read it twice without speaking. Then he looked up. "These are your personal assessments of enemy casualties." "Conservative assessments," Carver said. The figures: 91 enemy soldiers confirmed killed or mortally wounded by the direct action of Kilo 9. A further 40 to 60 wounded. The airstrike, made possible by the patrol's targeting data, had added casualties that would never be precisely counted. Signals intelligence later assessed the regiment as having ceased to function as a coherent fighting unit for 2 weeks following the Valley strike. Australian casualties: 3 wounded, none killed. The officer looked at the numbers again. 4 men. 4 men, Carver confirmed. The report was classified the same day. Operational security, the radio deception, the intelligence techniques, were assets that would be compromised if the operation became known. That was true as far as it went. It was also true that the report described something existing doctrine said was not survivable. and that the army was uncertain what to do with information that so comprehensively contradicted its own principles. The files were sealed in 1969, opened in 2000. The historians who read them noted the tactical innovation, the psychological operation that had paralyzed a regiment's command for 6 critical hours, the intelligence value that had enabled a strike setting back a major NVA offensive by 3 weeks, the casualty ratio, 91-0, as one of the most extreme in the documented history of small unit operations. And they noted in the final section a paragraph Carver had written himself in his own hand, unprompted. The principles that govern this operation are not complex. Ground was chosen and used intelligently. Fire was controlled and accurate. The enemy's understanding of our strength was managed throughout. The psychological dimension was treated as primary, not secondary. Above all, the patrol maintained the belief that the mission was achievable, because without that belief, it was not. The difference between this outcome and any other is not ability. It is the decision, maintained continuously over 72 hours, not to accept that the situation was impossible. Carver received the Distinguished Service Medal. Finch, Nguyen, and Warwick each received the Medal for Gallantry. The citations were brief. They did not describe what the medals were for in any terms a civilian would have recognized as adequate. The story of Kilo 9 is not a story about superhumans. That is the easiest misreading. The temptation is to look at the numbers: 4 men, 1,200 enemy, 91 killed, 0 lost, and place the men involved in a category beyond ordinary human capacity. They don't belong there. The explanation lives somewhere far more accessible and, in its way, far more confronting. Carver's patrol survived because they decided to survive. Not in the passive sense of hoping for the best outcome. In the active, operational, continuous sense of treating survival as achievable at every decision point, and then executing those decisions with the technical competence that years of training had built. This sounds simple, it is not. The gap between knowing something is theoretically achievable and maintaining that belief when 200 men are ascending a gully toward your position with machine gun support is a gap most human beings cannot bridge. What SAS selection is actually building, underneath the physical demands, which are a filter, not an end point, is the psychological architecture that allows a man to function clearly and decisively under the kind of pressure that shuts down ordinary cognition. To make the same quality of decision at hour 71 that he made at hour 1, Kilo 9 had that architecture. They demonstrated it across 3 days in circumstances their own army's doctrine said they should not have survived. The doctrine was wrong, or rather, it was incomplete. It had calculated force ratios, ammunition expenditure, fields of fire, terrain analysis, and arrived at a conclusion that 4 men holding against a regiment was unsurvivable. What it had not calculated was the weight of human will. The irreducibility of a trained soldier who has decided the mission is achievable, the team is worth dying for, and the situation is not impossible. That variable doesn't appear in the manuals. It appeared on a jungle ridge in Vietnam in August 1969, in the form of 4 men who were told by every available number that they should be dead, who looked at the numbers and decided otherwise. Phuoc Tuy Province, South Vietnam, August 22, 1969. 600 hours. 4 men lifted off a jungle ridge as the sun came up. Below them, the valley was quiet. The regiment was gone. The ridge remained. It always does.